For centuries it stood as a thriving centre of power, wealth and human ambition. Its streets echoed with life, its markets overflowed with trade, and its people believed their city would last forever. Then almost overnight it was abandoned. No great battle, no clear warning, no written explanation left behind. What happened was so sudden that homes, tools and personal belongings were left exactly where their owners dropped them. Even today, archaeologists are still searching for answers hidden beneath layers of dust and time. Tonight we uncover the mystery of the ancient city abandoned overnight, a place frozen in one of history's most puzzling disappearances. But before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're watching from. Every like and subscription helps us continue exploring the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Now dim the lights, settle in, and journey back to a city whose final day may never be fully understood. The city waits in silence. Wind moves through doorways that no longer lead to living rooms. Dust gathers on stone floors where thousands of footsteps once crossed every day. Empty streets stretch between houses that still stand. Storage jars remain where they were left. Workshops sit abandoned. Public buildings overlook plazas that have not heard human voices for centuries. The strangest detail is not that the city died. Cities die all the time. The strange detail is how abruptly everything seems to have stopped. Archaeologists arriving at ancient abandoned settlements often expect to find evidence of gradual decline. They expect layers of rebuilding, shrinking populations, collapsing infrastructure, and signs that people slowly drifted away over generations. Yet some ancient cities tell a different story. They appear to have been left behind with unusual speed. The final chapter seems compressed. Activity ends. Houses stand empty. Streets fall quiet. Nature begins its patient work of reclamation. In places like these, the landscape creates an unsettling illusion. It feels as though the inhabitants stepped away only moments ago. A bowl remains near a hearth. A tool lies forgotten in a workshop. A doorway still opens toward a courtyard. Human absence becomes more visible than any artifact. The city itself becomes evidence. Across history, entire communities have vanished from places that once seemed permanent. Some departures were planned. Others may have been desperate. Some occurred over years but left surprisingly little evidence of transition. Others may truly have unfolded with startling speed. The challenge for modern researchers is separating appearance from reality. Archaeology preserves fragments, not complete stories. What survives is often accidental. What disappears is usually much larger than what remains. Yet there are rare occasions when the surviving clues align in remarkable ways. Buildings remain largely intact. Household goods are found where they were used. Signs of destruction are absent. Mass graves are absent. Evidence for prolonged occupation after the city's decline is limited. Such places raise a haunting possibility. What if an entire urban population simply decided or was forced to leave? The mystery begins not with a catastrophe but with an absence. The city does not show obvious signs of violent annihilation. There are no towering walls shattered by invading armies. No thick layers of ash necessarily mark a final inferno. No dramatic battlefield tells the story. Instead, there is something quieter. Human activity stops. Imagine approaching such a place shortly after its abandonment. The streets would still be recognizable. Roofs would remain intact. Water systems might still function. Fields outside the walls might still hold crops nearing harvest. The city itself would appear ready for life. Yet nobody would answer a call from the marketplace. No smoke would rise from cooking fires. No merchants would open their stalls. No children would run through the alleys. An entire world would have slipped away. This image has fascinated historians for generations because it touches a deeper fear embedded in civilization itself. Cities represent permanence. They are built with the expectation that future generations will continue the work of those who came before. Monumental architecture expresses confidence in continuity. Roads, temples, reservoirs, markets, and administrative buildings all assume that tomorrow will resemble today. When a city is abandoned, that assumption breaks. Some ancient settlements disappear because their economic foundations collapse. Trade routes shift, rivers change course, political power moves elsewhere, environmental conditions deteriorate, population slowly drains away. These explanations are familiar and well documented, but occasionally the archaeological record seems too abrupt. The transition appears compressed into a narrow window of time. Scholars still debate exactly how sudden these abandonments truly were, yet the evidence remains intriguing. One reason these mysteries endure is that ancient people rarely leave clear explanations for their departures. Written records are scarce. Many cities vanish from history long before extensive documentation exists. Even literate societies often preserve the achievements of rulers while ignoring the experiences of ordinary residents. The final decisions made by thousands of individuals may leave almost no written trace. What survives instead are indirect clues. Food remains stored in containers. Construction projects halt midway through completion. Houses show no signs of later occupation. Imported goods stop arriving. Maintenance of public infrastructure ends. Bit by bit, archaeologists reconstruct a timeline from scattered fragments. The process resembles listening to a conversation after most of the words have been erased. Every artifact becomes important. Every abandoned room becomes a piece of evidence. The position of a broken pot, the contents of a storage jar, the age of a timber beam, the remains of ancient pollen trapped in soil layers all contribute to the story. Modern technology has transformed this search. Satellite imagery reveals forgotten urban layouts hidden beneath forests and deserts. Chemical analysis traces ancient migration patterns. Climate records preserved in cave formations and lake sediments help reconstruct environmental conditions. Microscopic traces extracted from archaeological sites provide information unimaginable only a few decades ago. And yet uncertainty remains at the center of many cases. No single explanation fully accounts for some abandoned cities. Environmental stress may have contributed, but not entirely. Political instability may have played a role, but evidence remains incomplete. Conflict may have occurred, but signs are limited. Disease may be possible, yet proof is elusive. Often the most honest answer is that several pressures combined until a community reached a breaking point. What makes these places so compelling is that they mirror challenges familiar to every civilization. Water shortages, economic disruption, political uncertainty, migration, environmental change, social instability. Ancient cities faced many of the same pressures that modern societies confront today, though, on very different scales. The empty streets left behind become more than archaeological curiosities. They become reminders of how quickly assumptions can change. A thriving urban centre can appear permanent for centuries. Its markets can flourish. Its population can grow. Its monuments can inspire confidence. Then within a surprisingly short period, everything can shift. Long after the people are gone, the city remains. Walls continue standing beneath the sun. Roads lead nowhere. Public squares gather dust instead of crowds. Silent houses preserve the outlines of vanished lives. The landscape remembers what written history forgets. And somewhere within those abandoned streets lies the central mystery that has drawn researchers, explorers, and dreamers for generations, not simply why the city died, but how an entire population reached the moment when staying no longer seemed possible. The abandoned city does not begin as a mystery, it begins as an opportunity. Long before its streets fall silent, before houses stand empty beneath drifting dust, before archaeologists arrive carrying notebooks and measuring tools, the location offers something precious in the ancient world. Water flows nearby. Fertile land stretches across the surrounding landscape. Trade routes intersect within reachable distance. Natural defences provide security. Resources support growth. What later becomes an enigma, first becomes a place where people choose to stay. Ancient cities rarely emerge by accident. Human beings have always understood the importance of geography. Settlements survive where food can be produced, where transportation is possible, and where communities can defend themselves from danger. The earliest inhabitants may arrive as small groups of farmers, herders, fishermen, merchants, or craftspeople. Their homes are modest. Their ambitions are practical. They are not building a future archaeological site. They are building lives. At first, the settlement may consist of only a handful of structures clustered near a dependable source of water. Families cultivate fields nearby. Livestock graze beyond the edges of habitation. Daily routines follow seasonal rhythms that have guided human communities for thousands of years. Planting, harvesting, repairing, storing, preparing for the next cycle. Then something changes. Perhaps agricultural production increases. Perhaps a regional trade network expands. Perhaps the settlement occupies a strategic position between larger centres of population. Goods begin moving through the area. Travellers arrive more frequently. Specialised labour becomes possible. Instead of every household producing everything it needs, some individuals focus on particular skills. Potters shape vessels used by hundreds of families. Metalworkers produce tools more efficiently than ordinary farmers. Builders develop techniques for larger structures. Traders connect distant communities. Religious leaders oversee ceremonies that strengthen social cohesion. Administrators emerge to coordinate increasingly complex systems. The settlement grows. A generation passes, then another. Simple houses multiply into neighbourhoods. Footpaths become streets. Public spaces appear. Storage facilities expand. Defensive walls may be constructed. Water management systems improve. The community begins investing labour not only in immediate survival, but also in long-term infrastructure. This transition marks one of humanity's most important achievements. Cities allow populations to organise on scales impossible in small villages. Knowledge accumulates more rapidly. Trade networks become more extensive. Political authority develops greater reach. Cultural traditions become more elaborate. The city that will one day be abandoned enters a period of confidence. Its residents likely view growth as evidence of success. New buildings rise, markets become busier, population increases, connections with neighbouring regions strengthen. What survives in the archaeological record often reflects this prosperity. Imported goods appear from distant locations. Construction projects grow more ambitious. Public architecture demonstrates wealth and organisational capacity. Many ancient urban centres depended on systems that required extraordinary cooperation. Reservoirs had to be maintained. Irrigation channels had to remain functional. Roads required upkeep. Food surpluses had to be stored and distributed. Such achievements are easy to overlook today, but in the ancient world they represented remarkable collective efforts. The city becomes more than a collection of buildings. It becomes an ecosystem of human relationships. Farmers outside the urban centre support residents within it. Traders connect local producers to distant markets. Religious institutions reinforce shared beliefs. Political authorities coordinate large-scale projects. Craftspeople create specialized goods unavailable elsewhere. Every part of the system depends upon countless others. As decades become centuries, the city acquires history. Children grow up hearing stories about earlier generations. Temples preserve traditions. Public monuments commemorate important events. Families occupy the same neighborhoods for years or even lifetimes. The city begins to feel permanent. This perception of permanence is one of civilization's most powerful illusions. From the perspective of an individual resident, the city may appear eternal. Its walls seem immovable. Its streets seem timeless. Public buildings dominate the skyline generation after generation. Most inhabitants never witness the complete life cycle of a city. They experience only a small portion of its existence. Yet beneath the appearance of stability, change never stops. Trade routes evolve, political alliances shift, climate fluctuates, population pressures increase and decrease, resources are consumed and renewed. New opportunities emerge while old advantages gradually weaken. At the height of prosperity, however, such concerns often remain invisible. Imagine standing in the marketplace during the city's flourishing years. Merchants display goods arriving from distant regions. Farmers bring harvests from surrounding fields. Craftspeople negotiate prices. Officials oversee transactions. Religious festivals draw crowds into public spaces. Construction workers repair and expand urban infrastructure. The city feels alive. Its residents likely cannot imagine that future generations will walk through empty streets trying to understand what happened here. One of the most striking patterns in archaeology is that many ancient cities appear strongest shortly before decline begins. Prosperity can mask vulnerability. Large populations require reliable food supplies. Extensive trade networks create dependence on distant regions. Complex political systems become difficult to manage. Infrastructure demands constant maintenance. Success itself can generate new risks. A growing population consumes more resources. Agricultural land experiences greater pressure. Political leaders face increasingly complex challenges. Economic systems become more interconnected. A disruption affecting one part of the system may eventually influence many others. What survives in the record suggests that the future abandoned city reaches a remarkable level of development before trouble emerges. Its architecture reflects confidence. Its economy supports specialization. Its population sustains urban life on an impressive scale. To outsiders it may appear secure. Travelers arriving from distant settlements likely see thriving markets and well-maintained public spaces. They see evidence of organization and prosperity. They see a community that has solved many of the challenges facing ancient societies. Yet hidden within every successful city is a dependence on conditions that cannot be guaranteed forever. Reliable water supplies can diminish. Agricultural productivity can decline. Political authority can weaken. Trade connections can falter. Environmental conditions can shift. External threats can emerge unexpectedly. The residents of the city do not know this future. They wake each morning expecting familiar routines. Children are born, buildings are repaired, crops are planted, festivals are celebrated, plans are made for years not yet lived. The city continues expanding, strengthening, and investing in its future. Its people build as though tomorrow is certain. That confidence becomes visible in stone foundations, carefully planned streets, public works, and monumental architecture. Each structure expresses faith in continuity. Each improvement assumes that future generations will inherit and maintain what has been created. For a long time, that assumption appears justified. The city thrives. Its influence spreads across the surrounding region. Wealth accumulates, population grows, daily life settles into patterns that seem stable and enduring. Nothing yet suggests that one day the same streets will stand empty beneath an open sky, preserving one of history's most enduring mysteries. For now the city belongs to the living. Its greatest years still lie ahead. The city reaches its height so gradually that few residents notice the moment it happens. There is no single day when a messenger announces that prosperity has peaked. No ceremony marks the exact point at which growth slows and maturity begins. Life simply continues. The markets remain crowded. The fields produce food. Trade caravans arrive and depart. Temples host ceremonies. Children become adults. Adults grow old. The city seems to exist in a state of permanent motion. If someone could walk through its streets during these years, they would encounter a world full of activity. Narrow alleys connect residential districts to public squares. The smell of cooking fires drifts from courtyards. Artisans work in workshops where stone, clay, metal, wood, and textiles are transformed into useful objects. Merchants display goods gathered from regions that many residents will never see with their own eyes. The city is not merely surviving, it is flourishing. What makes ancient urban life remarkable is not simply the number of people living together, but the complexity of the system supporting them. A large population requires food, water, sanitation, security, transportation, administration, and social organization. Every day, thousands of individual actions combine into something larger than any single person can control. Farmers outside the city rise before dawn and labor in fields whose harvests sustain people they may never meet. Traders travel dangerous routes across mountains, deserts, forests, or coastlines. Craftspeople devote years to mastering specialized skills. Builders repair walls and public structures. Religious leaders oversee rituals that reinforce shared beliefs and social stability. Each role contributes to a larger whole. The archaeological record often preserves traces of this complexity. Excavated workshops reveal areas dedicated to pottery production, metalworking, textile manufacture, and food processing. Storage facilities indicate systems capable of managing substantial agricultural surpluses. Imported materials demonstrate participation in long-distance trade networks. Public architecture reflects collective investment and political organization. Together, these clues allow researchers to reconstruct daily life with surprising detail. Morning begins with activity across the city. Water is collected, meals are prepared, animals are tended, market stalls are arranged, workshops open, administrative tasks begin. People move through streets that have become familiar through years of repetition. For many residents, life revolves around routines that change little from season to season. Children learn skills from parents and relatives. Families gather in shared spaces. Religious ceremonies punctuate the calendar. Community relationships shape nearly every aspect of existence. Births, marriages, disputes, celebrations, and deaths occur within a social framework that gives meaning to daily experience. These ordinary moments rarely appear in official records. Kings, rulers, and political events often dominate surviving historical accounts. Yet cities are sustained not by rulers alone, but by countless ordinary people whose names are lost. The abandoned city owes its existence to them. One of the most fascinating aspects of archaeology is its ability to recover fragments of lives that written history ignores. A worn grinding stone suggests years of food preparation. Repaired pottery indicates practical decisions made by households managing limited resources. Children's footprints preserved in ancient surfaces hint at lives lived far from political centres. These small details transform ruins into communities. At its height, the city likely contains neighbourhoods with distinct identities. Wealthier households occupy larger structures. Artisans cluster near workshops. Merchants settle close to market areas. Public buildings serve administrative, religious, or ceremonial functions. Infrastructure connects these districts into a functioning urban landscape. Visitors arriving from smaller settlements may find the city overwhelming. Its population is larger, its architecture is more ambitious, its economy is more diverse. Goods from distant regions are available. Opportunities appear greater than those found in rural communities. The city attracts newcomers seeking work security or social advancement. Population growth strengthens prosperity but also increases complexity. Food demands rise. Infrastructure requires expansion. Political leaders face new challenges. Resource management becomes increasingly important. The systems supporting urban life must operate reliably despite growing pressure. For a time they do. Evidence from many ancient cities suggests periods of remarkable stability. Decades may pass without major disruption. Generations grow up within an environment that feels predictable. People make plans based on the assumption that existing conditions will continue. This assumption influences everything. Builders invest labor in substantial homes. Authorities undertake ambitious public works projects. Religious institutions expand. Trade relationships deepen. Communities become rooted in place. The future appears secure enough to justify long-term commitments. Yet beneath the surface, subtle changes are already occurring. Ancient cities often depend upon environmental conditions that fluctuate over time. Rivers shift, rainfall patterns vary, soil fertility changes, forest resources become depleted. Population growth places additional demands on local ecosystems. These developments are rarely dramatic at first. A slightly weaker harvest one year may not attract attention. A modest reduction in water availability may seem temporary. Increased competition for resources can appear manageable. Communities adapt. Adjustments are made. Life continues. The city's success itself can conceal emerging vulnerabilities. A prosperous urban centre often develops layers of interdependence. Food arrives from farther away. Trade becomes increasingly important. Administrative systems grow more complicated. Social structures become more specialized. Such arrangements create efficiency, but they can also reduce flexibility. When disruptions occur, consequences spread through interconnected systems. At the time, however, few residents recognize these risks. Their attention remains focused on immediate concerns. Families manage households. Farmers monitor crops. Merchants pursue opportunities. Officials oversee governance. The city functions well enough that deeper structural weaknesses remain difficult to detect. Archaeologists looking back centuries later possess an advantage unavailable to those who lived through the period. They can examine entire sequences of development. Patterns invisible to contemporaries become clearer when viewed across generations. Even so, certainty remains elusive. The evidence preserves outcomes more effectively than causes. Researchers can often identify periods of growth and decline. Understanding exactly why changes occurred is more difficult. Human decisions, environmental pressures, economic trends, and political developments interact in complex ways. What survives in the record suggests that the city's final prosperous years are genuine. This is not a community already collapsing beneath obvious strain. It remains active, productive, and connected to the wider world. Its residents continue investing in homes, infrastructure, and institutions. Daily life proceeds with confidence. The rhythms of urban existence remain intact. Nothing yet resembles abandonment. The streets are full. Workshops are busy. Markets are active. Public spaces host gatherings and ceremonies. Children play in neighborhoods that have existed for generations. The city appears firmly established within the landscape. And perhaps that is why the mystery becomes so compelling, because when later evidence begins to reveal signs of trouble, those signs emerge not within a dying settlement but within a thriving one. The city seems strong. Its people continue building their future. Unseen beyond the horizon, however, forces are already gathering that will eventually challenge everything they believe to be permanent. The first signs of trouble are easy to miss. They do not arrive with collapsing walls or empty marketplaces. No dramatic disaster suddenly interrupts the city's daily rhythms. Life continues much as it always has. Farmers work their fields. Merchants travel familiar routes. Families gather in courtyards during the evening. Public ceremonies proceed according to traditions that have endured for generations. Yet somewhere within this apparent stability, subtle changes begin to accumulate. The challenge for archaeologists is that ancient warning signs rarely announce themselves clearly in the surviving evidence. A city does not leave behind a message stating that its confidence is beginning to erode. Instead, researchers must reconstruct small shifts from fragments scattered across centuries. Sometimes those clues appear in the environment. A layer of sediment preserved in a nearby lake may reveal changing rainfall patterns. Pollen trapped within ancient soils can indicate alterations in vegetation. Tree ring records from the broader region may suggest periods of drought or climatic instability. None of these signals alone explains a city's fate, but together they can reveal pressures that residents were forced to confront. Environmental change often operates slowly enough that people adapt rather than panic. A community experiencing slightly reduced rainfall does not immediately abandon its homes. Instead, farmers adjust planting strategies. Water storage becomes more important. New fields may be cultivated. Existing resources are managed more carefully. The city continues functioning. But adaptation has limits. As populations grow, urban centers become increasingly dependent on predictable supplies of food and water. Small disruptions that would be manageable for a village can become more serious when thousands of people rely on interconnected systems. In some ancient cities, archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that resource management became increasingly important during later periods of occupation. Reservoirs were expanded, water control systems were modified, storage facilities increased in size. Such developments may reflect prosperity and growth, but they can also indicate rising concern about future stability. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how these changes should be interpreted. Yet the pattern appears often enough to attract attention. Beyond environmental pressures, economic changes may begin leaving their own traces. Trade networks connect cities to distant regions. Goods, materials, ideas, and people move across landscapes that sometimes span hundreds of miles. These connections create opportunities, but they also create dependencies. When trade flourishes, cities prosper. When trade weakens, consequences ripple outward. Archaeologists sometimes notice changes in the quantity or distribution of imported goods during a city's final centuries. Luxury items become less common. Certain materials disappear from the record. Construction projects rely increasingly on local resources. Such patterns can suggest shifts in regional economic conditions. Again, none of these clues alone proves decline. Trade routes change for many reasons. Political boundaries shift. Consumer preferences evolve. New opportunities emerge elsewhere. What matters is the accumulation of evidence. Multiple small changes occurring simultaneously may indicate deeper instability. Political developments can be even harder to detect. Ancient governments often leave behind monuments celebrating success rather than documenting problems. Rulers advertise victories, not vulnerabilities. Public inscriptions emphasize strength. Administrative records focus on routine functions. Signs of internal tension rarely survive in obvious form, yet hints sometimes appear. Construction projects may stop unexpectedly. Public maintenance declines. Administrative buildings show evidence of changing use. Regional power structures become less visible in the archaeological record. These subtle alterations can suggest that institutions once responsible for coordination are becoming less effective. For residents living through these years, however, such changes may seem temporary. A delayed project does not signal collapse. Reduced trade activity may appear cyclical. A poor harvest can be blamed on bad luck. Most people expect familiar systems to recover, because those systems have recovered before. Human beings are remarkably skilled at normalizing gradual change. Conditions that would alarm an outsider often become part of everyday life for those experiencing them incrementally. Each adjustment feels manageable, each challenge appears temporary. Communities continue operating even as underlying conditions become more fragile. One of the most intriguing aspects of ancient urban decline is how often warning signs remain visible only in hindsight. Looking backward, researchers can identify patterns that appear meaningful. Looking forward, residents faced uncertainty. They did not know which difficulties would pass and which would grow worse. The city remains alive during this period. Its markets still function. Families still inhabit homes. Religious traditions continue. Trade persists even if less reliably than before. Visitors arriving from distant regions may notice little difference. The outward appearance of prosperity remains largely intact. Yet beneath that surface, pressures continue accumulating. Perhaps water becomes slightly less dependable. Perhaps agricultural yields become more variable. Perhaps political authority grows less effective. Perhaps regional conflicts disrupt transportation routes. Perhaps all of these developments occur together. No single explanation fully accounts for what follows, but many abandoned cities reveal evidence consistent with overlapping stresses rather than one catastrophic event. The complexity of urban systems means that problems rarely remain isolated. Reduced agricultural production influences trade. Economic difficulties affect political stability. Administrative weakness complicates resource management. Environmental challenges increase competition among communities. Small pressures begin interacting with one another. The city does not collapse. Not yet. Instead, it enters a period that archaeologists often find particularly difficult to interpret. The evidence suggests continuity alongside change, growth alongside strain, stability alongside vulnerability. Some neighborhoods remain active. Construction continues in certain areas. Daily life persists. At the same time, signs emerge that the future may not be as secure as the past. One surprising detail observed at several ancient sites is that people sometimes continue investing in homes and public structures, even during periods of growing uncertainty. This behavior makes sense. Most residents do not expect abandonment. They expect recovery. A family repairing its house assumes that it will remain there. A merchant expanding a business anticipates future customers. A community maintaining a temple believes that future ceremonies will occur. These decisions reveal optimism rather than decline, and that optimism can make the eventual abandonment even more striking. Because when archaeologists uncover evidence of repairs, renovations, and continued occupation shortly before a city's disappearance, they see a population that still believes in its future. The inhabitants are not preparing to leave. They are preparing to stay. That assumption lingers throughout the city. It is embedded in construction projects, household investments, and everyday routines. Life continues because most people expect life to continue. Yet the clues accumulating in soil layers, environmental records, trade patterns, and infrastructure tell a quieter story. Something is changing. The city still stands strong, but the foundations of that strength are beginning to shift. What remains unclear is whether anyone living there fully understood how serious those changes would eventually become. For the people living in the city, the final years do not feel final. That may be one of the most important clues of all. When modern observers imagine the collapse of an ancient city, they often picture dramatic scenes. Crowds fleeing through gates, buildings burning, panic spreading through the streets, leaders issuing desperate commands. Such images are powerful, but archaeology frequently reveals something far more unsettling. Ordinary life continues. The evidence preserved within many abandoned cities suggests that daily routines remain surprisingly normal until remarkably late in the story. Households prepare meals, workshops produce goods, public spaces remain in use, repairs are carried out, storage facilities are maintained, life goes on. This continuity creates one of the greatest puzzles surrounding cities that appear to have been abandoned quickly. If catastrophe was approaching, why do so many signs of normal activity remain? The answer may lie in the nature of human expectations. Most people do not live with the belief that their world is about to end. Communities adapt to challenges. Difficult years are followed by better ones. Droughts eventually break. Political disputes are resolved. Trade disruptions recover. Life has a way of encouraging confidence because survival itself depends upon planning for tomorrow. As a result, residents often continue investing in ordinary activities even when larger systems are becoming unstable. Archaeologists have repeatedly encountered evidence of this pattern. In some cities, houses show signs of recent maintenance shortly before abandonment. Floors are repaired, walls are rebuilt, roofs receive attention. These are not the actions of people preparing to leave forever. Elsewhere, storage facilities contain supplies intended for future use. Agricultural tools remain available. Workshops preserve equipment necessary for ongoing production. Public structures continue functioning. The city remains alive. One particularly revealing category of evidence comes from unfinished work. Construction projects sometimes stop abruptly. Buildings remain incomplete. Planned expansions never reach completion. Materials prepared for future use are left where workers last placed them. Such discoveries are fascinating because they capture moments suspended in time. A completed building tells researchers that a project happened. An unfinished building tells them that a project was expected to continue. Someone believed there would be more time. Someone expected workers to return. Someone assumed the future would resemble the present. Then something changed. What exactly changed remains one of the central mysteries. In some cases, archaeologists find evidence suggesting that abandonment occurs within a relatively narrow period. Activity that had continued for generations suddenly becomes difficult to detect. Occupation layers thin dramatically. Public maintenance ceases. New construction ends. Yet signs of destruction remain limited. This absence is important. When cities fall to overwhelming military conquest, traces often survive. Burned structures, defensive damage, weapons, human remains associated with violence. Such evidence does not always appear, but when it does, the story becomes clearer. The city under examination presents a more complicated picture. The final occupation phase seems active. People are still living here. Families still inhabit homes. Craftspeople continue working. Religious practices endure. The machinery of urban life continues turning. Then the evidence begins to fade. The streets themselves sometimes provide subtle clues. Patterns of movement visible through wear, maintenance, and occupation gradually disappear. Public spaces lose signs of regular use. Infrastructure that once required constant attention begins deteriorating. No single day marks the transition. Instead, researchers observe a threshold beyond which the city no longer functions as a living urban centre. One lesser-known aspect of ancient abandonment is that people often leave valuable items behind, not necessarily treasures, but objects that still possess practical worth. At first glance, this seems irrational. Why abandon useful possessions? The answer depends on circumstances. If departure occurs gradually, households usually take portable valuables with them. If departure becomes urgent, priorities change. Transporting large quantities of goods becomes difficult. Some items are too heavy, others are considered replaceable. Certain possessions may simply be forgotten amid uncertainty. Archaeological discoveries occasionally suggest precisely this kind of selective abandonment. Essential personal items disappear. Bulky household objects remain. Buildings stand largely intact. The pattern hints at movement rather than destruction. It suggests people left. The more difficult question is why. As evidence accumulates, researchers begin noticing another intriguing feature of the city's final years. Certain aspects of life appear surprisingly resilient despite broader pressures. Agricultural production may continue. Trade may persist at reduced levels. Public institutions may remain active. This resilience complicates simple explanations. If drought alone caused abandonment, why do signs of activity continue for so long? If warfare alone was responsible, why is evidence of widespread destruction limited? If disease was the primary cause, where are the expected demographic signatures? The evidence resists easy answers. Instead, it points toward a reality that is often true in human history. Major transformations rarely result from a single cause. Multiple pressures interact. Problems that might be manageable individually become dangerous when combined. A community can survive drought. A community can survive political instability. A community can survive economic disruption. Surviving all three simultaneously becomes far more difficult. The final years of the city may represent precisely such a convergence. What survives in the archaeological record suggests a population adapting to challenges rather than surrendering to them. Residents continue making decisions that assume a future. They repair homes, maintain infrastructure, preserve traditions. Yet adaptation itself can become evidence of stress. The need to conserve resources, the need to reorganize production, the need to modify existing systems. Each adjustment hints that familiar conditions are becoming harder to sustain. Still, from the perspective of ordinary inhabitants, the city remains home. Children continue growing up within its neighborhoods. Families continue gathering in courtyards. Merchants continue opening stalls. Farmers continue cultivating fields beyond the walls. Life remains recognizable. And perhaps that is what makes the approaching abandonment so difficult to understand. The people living through these years are not actors in a story of collapse. They are simply living. They cannot see the entire trajectory that future historians will reconstruct. They do not know that archaeologists centuries later will study their houses, tools, and streets searching for clues. They know only the present. A harvest must be gathered. A roof must be repaired. A family must be fed. A festival must be prepared. The future remains uncertain but imaginable. The city still feels permanent. Its residents continue behaving as though tomorrow will arrive much like today. Yet beneath these ordinary routines, something is shifting with increasing force. The evidence preserved in abandoned buildings, unfinished projects, and silent streets suggests that the turning point is approaching. The last days of normality are beginning to pass. No one living there can yet know it, but the city is moving toward a decision or a necessity that will alter its history forever. Soon the streets that have echoed with human voices for generations will begin their long conversation with silence. For centuries the city disappears. Its streets remain where they were built. Its walls continue weathering beneath sun, wind, and rain. Empty houses slowly fill with dust. Roofs collapse. Vegetation advances into courtyards. Animals move through spaces once occupied by people. Generations pass. Empires rise and fall. Languages change. New religions spread across continents. The memory of the city fades. Then long after the last resident has vanished from history, someone finds it again. The rediscovery of abandoned cities is often less dramatic than popular imagination suggests. There is rarely a single moment when a forgotten civilization suddenly reappears. More often, rediscovery unfolds through fragments. Travelers report unusual ruins. Local communities preserve stories associated with ancient sites. Explorers notice strange mounds, collapsed structures, or unexpected stonework emerging from the landscape. The process begins with curiosity. A cluster of ruins in a remote valley. An unusual hill that does not appear entirely natural. Ancient walls protruding from dense vegetation. Scattered artifacts exposed by erosion. At first, nobody fully understands what is being observed. Many abandoned cities spend centuries hidden in plain sight. Some lie beneath forests so dense that their true scale remains invisible from the ground. Others disappear beneath drifting desert sands. Agricultural activity buries ancient neighborhoods. Rivers alter their courses. Sediment accumulates. Entire urban landscapes become concealed beneath layers of natural change. In some cases, local populations never completely forget the existence of these places. Stories survive. Legends attach themselves to ruins. Certain locations acquire reputations as ancient settlements, sacred places, or remnants of lost peoples. These traditions may preserve valuable information, though they often become intertwined with mythology over time. When systematic investigation finally begins, researchers usually expect to uncover a settlement. What they sometimes discover instead is a city. The distinction matters. A settlement might contain dozens of structures. A city contains systems, streets, public buildings, infrastructure, administrative spaces, residential districts, evidence of organized urban life. As excavation progresses, the scale of the site becomes clearer. Walls emerge from beneath accumulated soil. Roads appear. Foundations reveal neighborhoods extending farther than anyone anticipated. The outlines of a vanished urban world begin taking shape. For archaeologists, these moments are extraordinary. Each layer removed exposes another fragment of human experience. Floors preserved beneath collapsed roofs. Pottery left behind centuries earlier. Tools, ornaments, storage containers, and architectural features that have remained untouched for generations. The city begins speaking again, not through written testimony but through material evidence. One trench reveals domestic life. Another reveals economic activity. A third reveals religious practices. Gradually, separate discoveries combine into a broader picture. Researchers start reconstructing how people lived, worked, travelled, traded, and organised their communities. The city transforms from a collection of ruins into a functioning society. Yet the deeper investigators dig, the stranger the story becomes. Certain findings refuse to fit expectations. Buildings appear unexpectedly well preserved. Household objects remain in unusual locations. Signs of destruction seem limited. Evidence for long-term reoccupation is surprisingly scarce. Instead of revealing a straightforward narrative of decline, the city presents a puzzle. Why does it look as though people left so suddenly? This question often emerges slowly. During early excavations, attention focuses on documenting architecture and artifacts, establishing dates, understanding cultural affiliations, mapping urban layouts. Only later do broader patterns become visible. Entire neighborhoods show signs of abandonment occurring within relatively narrow periods. Public spaces cease functioning. Maintenance ends. Daily activity disappears. The city seems to have stopped. One of the most revealing discoveries in archaeology is context. An artifact alone can be interesting. An artifact found exactly where it was last used can be transformative. A cooking vessel beside a hearth. Tools within a workshop. Storage containers inside a household. These details preserve relationships between people and objects. They capture moments frozen by time. The rediscovered city contains many such moments. Rooms remain organized in recognizable ways. Structures preserve evidence of their intended functions. The layout of urban life remains visible despite centuries of abandonment. Researchers begin realizing that they are not merely studying architecture. They are studying absence. The people are gone. The systems that supported them are gone. The decisions that led to departure are gone. Yet traces remain. Modern archaeological methods expand what can be learned from those traces. Radiocarbon dating establishes timelines. Chemical analysis reveals trade connections. Plant remains indicate agricultural practices. Animal bones provide insight into diet and economy. Microscopic evidence preserved within sediments offers clues about environmental conditions. Each technique contributes another piece of the puzzle. What emerges is both fascinating and frustrating. The city clearly flourished. It clearly supported a substantial population. It clearly experienced abandonment. but the exact sequence connecting prosperity to departure remains elusive. Scholars still debate important details. Some emphasize environmental evidence. Others focus on political or economic factors. Certain discoveries support multiple interpretations simultaneously. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet incomplete evidence does not mean useless evidence. On the contrary, archaeology excels at revealing patterns hidden across long periods of time. A single abandoned room may seem insignificant. Hundreds of abandoned rooms tell a story. A single unfinished structure may be accidental. Multiple unfinished projects suggest broader disruption. Patterns matter, and as excavation continues, patterns become increasingly difficult to ignore. The city does not resemble a place destroyed by immediate catastrophe, nor does it resemble a place gradually occupied by new populations over centuries. Instead, it occupies an unusual middle ground, a thriving urban centre, then abandonment. The transition appears compressed, not necessarily overnight in the literal sense, but surprisingly rapid when compared to the long history that came before. This realization transforms the city from an archaeological site into a historical mystery. Researchers begin asking new questions. What pressures were building during the final years? Why did residents leave rather than adapt further? Where did they go? Why was the city never fully revived? Every excavation season adds information. Every discovery narrows certain possibilities while opening others. Yet the central mystery remains. The rediscovery of the city has solved one problem. Humanity now knows that the place existed. A far more difficult challenge lies ahead, understanding why it was abandoned. Because buried beneath centuries of dust and silence are clues suggesting that the departure of an entire population may have been one of the most consequential decisions in the city's history. The ruins have returned to the world. Now the search for answers truly begins. As excavations spread through the abandoned city, archaeologists encounter something both exciting and deeply unsettling. The city does not look empty. The people are gone, but traces of their lives remain everywhere. In many ancient sites, centuries of later occupation erase evidence of earlier communities. New buildings replace old ones. Streets are rebuilt. Materials are reused. Generations overwrite the landscape. By the time archaeologists arrive, only fragments survive. This city is different. Large portions of it appear frozen at the moment activity ceased. Rooms remain identifiable. Storage spaces are still recognizable. Workshops preserve evidence of production. Public buildings retain traces of their former functions. The urban landscape has not been completely rewritten by later inhabitants. The result is extraordinary. Researchers can move through the ruins and reconstruct entire pieces of daily life with unusual clarity. A house reveals where people cooked their meals. A courtyard suggests where families gathered. A workshop shows where tools were manufactured or repaired. A storage room indicates how food and supplies were managed. Each discovery adds another layer to the story. The city begins to feel inhabited again, at least in imagination. One room may contain grinding stones worn smooth by years of preparing grain. Another preserves pottery arranged along a wall. Elsewhere, fragments of woven materials, tools, ornaments, or household containers reveal the routines that once filled these spaces. None of these objects are spectacular treasures. That is precisely why they matter. Royal monuments can tell historians about rulers. Ordinary objects tell them about people. The abandoned city contains countless reminders that urban life is built from ordinary actions repeated across generations. Meals prepared, clothing repaired, children raised, goods exchanged, religious rituals observed, neighbours interacting. The evidence of these activities survives in subtle forms, where patterns on floors indicate movement through buildings. Food residues preserved inside vessels reveal dietary habits. Animal bones show what people ate. Plant remains suggest agricultural practices. Chemical traces trapped within ancient surfaces provide information that residents themselves could never have imagined leaving behind. Taken together, these clues allow researchers to reconstruct a surprisingly detailed portrait of everyday existence. And then they encounter something strange. Many rooms appear as though they were simply left, not abandoned in panic, not destroyed by violence, just left. This distinction is important. When people permanently abandon a location, they usually take valuable possessions with them. Portable items disappear first. Materials that can be reused are often removed. Buildings may be dismantled for construction elsewhere. Yet in some parts of the city, objects remain in positions suggesting that departure was incomplete. Not everything was taken. Not everything was packed. Not everything was prepared for removal. Archaeologists are careful about interpreting such evidence. Appearances can be misleading. Objects may shift over centuries. Natural processes alter archaeological contexts. Looting can remove important materials long before formal excavation begins. Even so, certain patterns remain difficult to ignore. The city contains rooms that seem paused rather than emptied. A storage area still contains containers. A workshop preserves tools associated with specific tasks. Domestic spaces retain traces of ordinary household activities. These discoveries create an almost uncomfortable sense of proximity to the past. The inhabitants do not feel remote. They feel absent. The difference is subtle but powerful. Remote people belong to another world. Absent people seem as though they might return. This impression has influenced generations of researchers exploring abandoned cities around the world. The closer archaeologists come to reconstructing daily life, the more mysterious the final departure becomes. Because the city does not resemble a place everyone expected to leave forever. In some areas, evidence suggests continuity almost until the end. Structures remain maintained. Living spaces remain functional. Infrastructure continues operating. The urban system is weakened in certain respects, but it is still recognizable as a city. One particularly fascinating category of evidence comes from food storage. Ancient communities depended heavily on their ability to preserve resources for future use. Grain-dried foods and other supplies represented security against uncertainty. The presence or absence of stored resources can reveal much about conditions during a city's final phase. At this site, some storage facilities indicate planning for the future. Food was being accumulated. Resources were being managed. People expected tomorrow to matter. This detail may seem small, but its implications are significant. Communities preparing for immediate abandonment do not typically invest heavily in future storage. Communities expecting continued occupation often do. The evidence suggests that many residents anticipated remaining where they were. Then circumstances changed. What those circumstances were remains unclear. Another revealing clue emerges from the city's architecture. Buildings show different stages of use and maintenance. Some structures appear carefully maintained until late in the occupation sequence. Others show signs of modification or adaptation. These patterns suggest active responses to changing conditions rather than passive decline. The inhabitants were not simply waiting for collapse. They were making decisions, adjusting, adapting, attempting to sustain urban life. This observation challenges simplistic narratives of sudden catastrophe. Human societies are resilient. Communities rarely abandon cities at the first sign of trouble. They experiment with solutions. They reorganize resources. They endure hardship. The archaeological record often preserves evidence of these efforts. The abandoned city is no exception. Its residents appear to have invested considerable energy in maintaining their world. Yet despite those efforts, something eventually overwhelmed the balance. The city crossed a threshold. Researchers can see the outcome clearly. They struggle to identify the precise moment. One lesser-known aspect of archaeology is that absence itself can be evidence. Certain things expected at a site fail to appear. Large-scale destruction is limited. Mass casualties are limited. Evidence of immediate conquest is limited. These missing signs are just as important as the objects that remain. They narrow possibilities. They suggest that whatever happened may not fit traditional images of collapse. Instead, the city presents a more complicated scenario. Its inhabitants leave behind traces of preparation, adaptation, and continuity. Yet ultimately they leave. The abandoned rooms become silent witnesses. A hearth no longer burns, a workshop no longer echoes with labour, a courtyard no longer hosts conversation. The city preserves the framework of life, but not life itself. And as archaeologists continue uncovering more evidence, a troubling question begins demanding attention. If the city was still functioning, still inhabited, and still worth maintaining, where did everyone go? The buildings remain. The streets remain. The traces of daily existence remain. The people vanish, understanding that disappearance becomes the next challenge in unraveling one of history's most enduring mysteries. This city is full of evidence. The people are not. That simple contrast sits at the center of the mystery. Archaeologists can map streets, identify neighborhoods, analyze trade goods, reconstruct diets, estimate population size, and determine how buildings were used. They can trace centuries of development and reveal remarkable details about daily life. Yet one question remains stubbornly difficult to answer. What happened to the inhabitants? The ruins suggest that thousands of people once lived here. Families occupied houses, merchants conducted business, farmers supported the urban economy, religious leaders oversaw ceremonies, craftspeople filled workshops with activity. The city was not an abstract collection of structures. It was a living community. Then the community disappears. The first possibility is also the simplest. Perhaps the people moved elsewhere. From a modern perspective, relocation may not seem particularly mysterious. Communities migrate throughout history. Environmental conditions change. Economic opportunities shift. Political circumstances evolve. People adapt by moving. Yet large-scale migration leaves traces. Where did these former residents go? Did they settle nearby? Did they disperse across multiple regions? Did they merge with neighbouring populations? Did they establish new communities elsewhere? Answering these questions is far more difficult than identifying abandoned buildings. Unlike architecture, people do not remain in place. They carry skills, traditions, beliefs, languages, and cultural practices into new environments. Material evidence becomes scattered. Generations pass. Distinct identities blend with those of surrounding populations. The archaeological record grows quieter. In some cases, researchers have successfully tracked aspects of ancient migration through pottery styles, construction techniques, burial customs, and other cultural markers. Similar patterns occasionally appear in settlements established after the abandonment of major cities. These clues suggest movement. What they rarely provide is certainty. A particular architectural style appearing elsewhere may indicate migration. It may also reflect trade cultural influence or independent development. Ancient societies interacted in complex ways, making simple explanations dangerous. The evidence remains incomplete. What survives in the record suggests that at least some inhabitants likely found new homes rather than disappearing entirely. Human populations rarely vanish without descendants. Communities reorganize, families relocate, traditions adapt. Civilizations may collapse. People usually continue. This distinction is crucial. The abandoned city may cease functioning as an urban center, but its residents almost certainly carry elements of their culture into other places. The mystery, therefore, is not whether people survived. The mystery is why they left. One of the most intriguing observations made by archaeologists concerns the relative scarcity of evidence for mass death. If disease, warfare, or catastrophe suddenly destroyed the population, researchers might expect substantial concentrations of human remains. Such evidence is often limited or absent. This does not eliminate those possibilities. Ancient burial practices vary enormously. Human remains may not preserve well. Populations may have evacuated before disaster struck. Multiple factors may have influenced outcomes. Still, the absence remains significant. The city does not resemble a place where everyone died. It resembles a place where people departed. The challenge lies in determining the circumstances. Imagine the final years from the perspective of an ordinary resident. The city has been home for generations. Family history is rooted in its streets. Religious traditions are tied to local landmarks. Economic relationships depend on familiar networks. Leaving would not be a casual decision. Abandonment carries immense costs. Homes are left behind. Fields are surrendered. Social connections are disrupted. Sacred places are abandoned. Memories become detached from physical locations. For most people throughout history, remaining in place is easier than starting over elsewhere. This reality suggests that significant pressures were likely involved. Whatever drove the population away was probably powerful enough to outweigh the benefits of staying. Yet the evidence indicates that the process may not have been entirely chaotic. Some households appear to have removed important possessions. Portable valuables are often absent. Certain categories of objects disappear more consistently than others. This pattern hints at planning. People may have had time to prepare. If so, abandonment becomes even more fascinating. The city was not necessarily conquered overnight. Its residents may have recognized that conditions were deteriorating. They may have concluded that relocation offered better prospects than persistence. They may have left gradually at first, with movement accelerating as circumstances worsened. Scholars still debate how quickly this occurred. The phrase abandoned overnight is compelling, but archaeology rarely provides evidence for a single dramatic moment. More commonly, researchers observe a surprisingly rapid transition, relative to the centuries of occupation that preceded it. A city thriving for hundreds of years can appear to vanish almost instantly when viewed across the broader timeline of history. From the perspective of those living through events, however, the process may have unfolded over years or decades. This distinction matters. It reminds us that historical mysteries often compress human experiences into simplified narratives. The people themselves lived through uncertainty. They made decisions without knowing how the story would end. Another possibility occasionally considered involves fragmentation. Rather than leaving together, different groups may have departed at different times. Some families move first, others remain. Economic activity declines. Population gradually falls below the threshold necessary to sustain urban systems. Eventually, the city ceases functioning, even though many individuals have already established lives elsewhere. Such processes are difficult to detect archaeologically because the final result looks similar. The city becomes empty. The pathways leading to that emptiness remain partially hidden. One surprising detail found at various abandoned settlements around the world is that neighbouring communities sometimes continue thriving after a major urban centre is deserted. This observation suggests that regional collapse is not always required. A city can fail while surrounding populations survive. Resources may shift elsewhere. Trade routes may change. Political authority may relocate. People may simply conclude that another location offers greater security. If that happened here, the disappearance becomes less mysterious in one sense and more mysterious in another. The people survive. The city does not. The physical place loses its importance even though the population endures. For archaeologists walking through the ruins centuries later, this distinction is invisible at first glance. Empty buildings suggest loss, yet many of the descendants of the inhabitants may have continued living, farming, trading, worshipping and raising families elsewhere. The city vanishes from history. Its people continue shaping it. The challenge is tracing those hidden connections. As researchers search for answers, attention increasingly turns toward a factor that has influenced human settlement patterns throughout history: the environment. Because if the land itself was changing, the decision to leave may have been less sudden than it appears and far more inevitable. Long before archaeologists uncover abandoned houses and silent streets, the environment is already writing part of the story. Human civilizations often appear powerful. They build cities, construct monuments, establish trade networks, and transform landscapes. Yet beneath every achievement lies a dependence that cannot be escaped. Water must continue flowing. Crops must continue growing. The land must continue supporting life. When these foundations begin to change, even the most impressive cities can become vulnerable. For many years, researchers studying abandoned urban centers focused primarily on political events, warfare, and economic decline. These explanations remain important, but advances in environmental science have revealed something equally significant. Climate and ecology are not merely backgrounds to human history. They are active participants. Ancient cities survive because they exist within environmental systems. When those systems change, consequences follow. One of the most valuable developments in modern archaeology has been the ability to reconstruct past climates with increasing accuracy. Lake sediments preserve records of changing rainfall. Cave formations record shifts in moisture levels. Tree rings reveal years of drought and abundance. Ancient pollen preserved in soil layers indicates changing vegetation. Together, these sources provide a window into environmental conditions that existed centuries or even millennia ago. In many cases, they reveal patterns that would have been invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Periods of prosperity often coincide with favorable environmental conditions. Periods of stress frequently correspond with drought, changing rainfall patterns, or ecological disruption. The city at the center of this mystery may have experienced precisely such challenges. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the severity of environmental pressures involved. Yet multiple lines of research suggest that changes in climate could have played an important role in the city's final centuries. At first, the effects might have been subtle. Rain arrives less predictably. Growing seasons become more uncertain. Water reservoirs require greater management. Agricultural yields fluctuate. Each problem seems manageable in isolation. Communities adapt. People have always adapted. Ancient farmers possessed extensive knowledge of local conditions. They modified planting strategies, expanded irrigation systems, diversified crops, stored surplus food during favorable years. Human societies are remarkably resilient when confronting environmental variability, but resilience has limits. A single poor harvest may be survivable. Several difficult years in succession create greater challenges. Decades of environmental instability can fundamentally alter the viability of a region. The problem is rarely starvation alone. Environmental stress affects everything connected to it. Agricultural shortages reduce economic activity. Competition for resources increases. Political leaders face growing pressure. Trade networks become more important precisely when maintaining them becomes harder. Social tensions intensify. The effects spread through the entire system. Imagine living in the city during such a period. The changes do not necessarily appear catastrophic. There is still food. There is still water. Life continues. Yet uncertainty becomes more common. A farmer notices that familiar weather patterns are becoming less reliable. A merchant observes fluctuations in available goods. Officials devote increasing attention to resource management. Households begin planning more carefully for difficult years. None of these developments automatically leads to abandonment. The city has survived challenges before. People expect adaptation to continue working, and often it does. One of the most fascinating aspects of environmental archaeology is that societies can remain functional for surprisingly long periods despite worsening conditions. Human ingenuity delays consequences. Infrastructure compensates for shortages. Communities reorganize. This capacity for adaptation can make eventual collapse appear sudden, even when underlying problems have existed for generations. The city may have followed exactly this pattern. Its residents respond creatively. Reservoirs are maintained. Agricultural practices evolve. Trade connections help offset local shortages. The urban system survives. For a while. Eventually, however, adaptation itself becomes evidence of strain. Archaeologists sometimes identify expanding water management systems, increasing storage capacity, or changing agricultural strategies during a city's final phase. Such developments demonstrate resilience, but they may also indicate growing concern. People do not invest heavily in solutions unless they perceive problems. The question becomes whether those solutions were enough. Some researchers argue that prolonged drought may have reduced the region's carrying capacity. Fewer people could be supported by the same landscape. Water became harder to secure. Agricultural production became less reliable. Others caution against oversimplification. Climate alone rarely explains abandonment. Many societies endure severe environmental challenges without deserting major cities. Political leadership, economic flexibility, technological adaptation, and social organization all influence outcomes. No single explanation fully accounts for what happened. That phrase appears repeatedly in discussions of abandoned cities because the evidence consistently resists simple answers. Environmental stress may have been one factor among many, yet its influence remains difficult to ignore. Another revealing clue comes from the broader region surrounding the city. Environmental change rarely affects one settlement in isolation. Neighboring communities experience similar conditions. Some survive, some shrink, others disappear. Researchers examining regional settlement patterns often discover shifts in population distribution during periods associated with urban decline. People move, not necessarily because life becomes impossible, rather because better opportunities exist elsewhere. A river valley with more dependable water, a region with stronger trade connections, a location offering greater security during uncertain times. Migration becomes adaptation. From the perspective of individual families, relocation may represent a rational decision. From the perspective of the city, however, each departure matters. Urban centers depend upon population density. They require labor, trade, administration, maintenance. When enough people leave, systems begin weakening. As systems weaken, additional departures become more attractive. A cycle emerges. The city may have entered precisely such a cycle. Environmental pressures encourage migration. Migration reduces urban resilience. Reduced resilience encourages further migration. Over time, momentum builds. Eventually, remaining residents face a difficult calculation. Continue investing in a city that appears increasingly vulnerable, or seek opportunities elsewhere. The archaeological record suggests that many chose the second option. Not necessarily all at once, not necessarily under immediate threat, but increasingly. The city loses people, then activity, then purpose. What once seemed permanent begins unraveling. Yet even this explanation leaves important questions unanswered. Environmental stress can encourage migration. It can weaken economies. It can undermine political systems. But why does the city appear to have been abandoned so completely? Why is reoccupation so limited? Why do signs of adaptation eventually give way to silence? To answer those questions, researchers must look beyond climate and resources, because another force may have been operating alongside environmental change, one as old as civilization itself: conflict. If environmental change weakens a city, conflict can push it closer to the edge. Throughout history, warfare has reshaped landscapes, redirected populations, and altered the fate of entire civilizations. Cities rise because they occupy valuable locations. Those same advantages often make them targets. Trade routes attract merchants, but they also attract rivals. Fertile land supports prosperity, but it can become something worth fighting over. Strategic positions create security, but they also create competition. For archaeologists investigating abandoned cities, conflict is one of the first explanations that naturally comes to mind. An enemy arrives. The city falls. The population flees. The story ends. Sometimes the evidence supports exactly this sequence. Burn layers cover entire districts. Defensive walls show signs of assault. Weapons are discovered in unusual concentrations. Human remains reveal violent injuries. Historical records describe invasions and destruction. In such cases, the explanation appears relatively straightforward. The city dies because it is defeated. Yet the city at the center of this mystery presents a more complicated picture. The expected signs of catastrophic conquest are limited. Researchers find no overwhelming evidence for a final battle that devastated the entire urban center. Buildings are not uniformly destroyed. Streets do not appear littered with evidence of widespread violence. The archaeological record lacks the kind of unmistakable signature that major military annihilation often leaves behind. This absence does not eliminate conflict as a factor. Far from it, war influences societies in ways that extend well beyond the battlefield. A city does not need to be physically destroyed to suffer severe consequences from regional instability. Trade routes become dangerous. Agricultural production is disrupted. Resources are diverted toward defense. Political alliances shift. Population movement accelerates. The cumulative effects can be profound. Imagine the city during a period of increasing regional tension. News travels slowly but not invisibly. Merchants arriving from neighboring territories bring reports of disputes, raids, shifting alliances, and emerging threats. Political leaders monitor developments carefully. Defensive preparations may increase. Economic uncertainty grows. Life continues, yet confidence begins to weaken. Ancient cities often depended upon networks extending far beyond their immediate surroundings. Food, raw materials, luxury goods, and information flowed along routes connecting distant communities. Conflict anywhere within these networks could affect settlements far removed from actual fighting. A caravan fails to arrive, a trade partner loses influence, a neighboring region becomes unstable. Each disruption imposes costs. Over time, those costs accumulate. One intriguing pattern observed in several ancient civilizations is that political fragmentation frequently accompanies urban decline. Large systems that once coordinated trade resource distribution and security begin breaking apart. Authority becomes decentralized. Regional competition intensifies. The consequences are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are administrative. Infrastructure receives less maintenance. Long-distance exchange becomes less reliable. Communities increasingly focus on local survival. The city remains inhabited, but its connections weaken. Such developments are difficult to identify with certainty in the archaeological record. Political institutions leave uneven traces. Written documentation may be limited or absent. Scholars must infer broader trends from indirect evidence. The evidence remains incomplete. Even so, some researchers argue that political instability may have contributed significantly to the city's abandonment. Not because armies destroyed it, because instability changed the calculations of its residents. Consider a merchant deciding where to invest resources, a farmer evaluating future prospects, a family considering long-term security. If the regional environment becomes unpredictable, relocation begins appearing more attractive. The decision to leave does not require immediate danger. It requires uncertainty. One lesser-known aspect of ancient conflict is that fear itself can become a historical force. Communities often respond not only to actual threats, but also to perceived ones. Rumors spread. Expectations change. People prepare for possibilities rather than certainties. A city experiencing environmental stress and political instability simultaneously faces a particularly difficult situation. Resource shortages increase competition. Competition encourages conflict. Conflict further disrupts resource access. Each problem amplifies the other. The result can be a feedback loop that gradually undermines urban resilience. Archaeologists sometimes detect indirect signs of such pressures. Fortifications are strengthened. Settlement patterns shift toward more defensible locations. Trade networks contract. Population movement increases. These developments do not prove warfare, but they suggest concern about security. The city's inhabitants may have recognized growing risks long before abandonment occurred. What survives in the record suggests adaptation rather than panic. Defensive measures may have been improved. Resources may have been managed more carefully. Communities may have sought to preserve stability despite increasingly difficult circumstances. For a time, those efforts appear successful. The city survives, its institutions continue functioning, its residents remain. Yet survival and security are not identical. A community can endure while confidence erodes, and confidence matters. Cities not sustained solely by walls, roads, and buildings. They are sustained by belief. People invest in urban life because they expect benefits to outweigh risks. When that balance changes, migration becomes more appealing. The city may have reached precisely such a threshold, not necessarily because it was conquered, not necessarily because it was doomed, but because the future became uncertain enough that remaining no longer seemed worthwhile. This possibility helps explain one of the enduring puzzles surrounding the site. Why leave a city that still appears functional? The answer may be that functionality is not the same as sustainability. A city can continue operating while underlying conditions deteriorate. Its markets may remain open. Its houses may remain occupied. Its institutions may remain recognizable. Yet confidence in the future may already be fading. The archaeological record captures structures. It rarely captures emotions. Fear, doubt, concern, hope. These factors influence human decisions as much as material conditions do, yet they are among the hardest things for historians to recover. Still, their effects may be visible. People relocate. Communities reorganize. Urban centers shrink. Eventually, abandonment follows. Conflict alone does not fully explain the city's fate. The evidence simply does not support a straightforward narrative of violent destruction. Yet neither can conflict be ignored. Regional instability may have interacted with environmental stress, economic disruption, and population movement in ways that gradually undermined the foundations of urban life. The city survives challenge after challenge. Then something changes. The balance that once favored staying begins favoring departure. And as researchers continue examining the final years of occupation, another possibility emerges. Not warfare, not drought, not politics alone, but a threat far more difficult to trace through the archaeological record. Disease. Among all the explanations proposed for abandoned cities, disease occupies a strange position. It is both plausible and elusive. Wars leave damaged walls. Droughts leave environmental signatures. Economic decline alters trade patterns. Disease, by contrast, often passes through a population while leaving surprisingly little direct evidence behind. Entire communities can be transformed by epidemics, yet centuries later, archaeologists may struggle to identify clear traces of what occurred. This difficulty has made disease one of the most debated possibilities in the study of ancient urban abandonment. The idea is immediately understandable. Cities bring people together. They concentrate populations. They facilitate trade and movement. The same networks that support prosperity can also spread illness. Throughout history, epidemics have reshaped societies, weakened economies, altered political systems, and accelerated migration. Could something similar have happened here? The evidence offers no simple answer. Researchers investigating abandoned cities often search for clues that might indicate widespread disease. Human remains are examined for signs of infection. Burial patterns are analyzed. Settlement histories are compared with known outbreaks in neighboring regions. Environmental conditions that might encourage disease transmission are considered. Sometimes the results are suggestive. Rarely are they definitive. One challenge is that many infectious diseases leave little visible evidence on skeletons. A person may die from illness without developing changes that survive in the archaeological record. Even when physical traces exist, preservation conditions may erase them over time. The silence of the evidence becomes part of the problem. Absence does not necessarily mean disease was absent, yet absence also prevents certainty. The city provides no unmistakable proof of a devastating epidemic. There are no obvious mass burial grounds containing overwhelming numbers of victims. No surviving records describe a catastrophe sweeping through the population. No single discovery resolves the question. Still, some scholars remain interested in the possibility, not because disease alone explains the abandonment, but because it could have intensified existing pressures. Imagine the city during a period already marked by environmental uncertainty and regional instability. Food supplies are becoming less reliable. Trade networks face disruptions. Confidence in the future is weakening. Then illness appears. Even a moderate epidemic can have serious consequences under such conditions. Labor shortages emerge. Agricultural production suffers. Economic activity slows. Fear spreads through communities. Recovery becomes more difficult. The effects extend beyond mortality itself. One of the most important lessons from historical epidemics is that social disruption often matters as much as the disease. Communities change behavior. Travel patterns shift. Trade contracts. Institutions struggle to function normally. Population movement increases. The consequences ripple outward. Ancient residents would not have understood disease in modern scientific terms. They possessed their own explanations rooted in observation, tradition, and belief. Illness might be interpreted through religious frameworks, environmental observations, or cultural understandings of health and misfortune. Regardless of explanation, the practical effects remain real. A family losing workers faces hardship. A community experiencing repeated illness faces uncertainty. A city confronting multiple challenges simultaneously becomes increasingly vulnerable. The archaeological record occasionally hints at these possibilities. Settlement patterns shift. Population density decreases. Certain districts appear less active than before. Yet such evidence is difficult to separate from other causes. Drought can produce similar outcomes. Economic decline can produce similar outcomes. Migration can produce similar outcomes. This overlap makes disease one of the hardest explanations to evaluate. The evidence remains incomplete. No single explanation fully accounts for the city's abandonment. That conclusion appears repeatedly because every proposed cause encounters limitations. Environmental stress explains some patterns, but not all. Conflict explains others, but remains insufficient on its own. Disease fits certain possibilities, yet lacks definitive proof. The city resists simple narratives. Perhaps that resistance itself is revealing. Human societies are complex. Major transformations rarely result from a single event. Instead, multiple pressures interact over time. Environmental change weakens resilience. Political instability increases uncertainty. Economic disruption reduces flexibility. Disease compounds existing difficulties. Together, these forces can produce outcomes that none would create independently. Some researchers favor precisely this interpretation. The city may not have fallen victim to one catastrophe. It may have experienced the cumulative effects of many. Viewed this way, abandonment becomes easier to understand. The question shifts from what destroyed the city to what convinced people that leaving offered a better future than staying. Disease, whether major or minor, could have contributed to that calculation, not necessarily as the primary cause, but as one more source of pressure within an already strained system. Another intriguing aspect of the disease hypothesis involves perception. Communities respond not only to actual outbreaks, but also to fear of future ones. Rumors spread. People interpret unusual events through existing anxieties. Confidence erodes. Fear can travel faster than illness. The archaeological record rarely preserves such emotions directly, yet their influence may be profound. A city experiencing uncertainty on multiple fronts becomes vulnerable to psychological as well as material stress. Residents begin questioning assumptions. Will harvests improve? Will trade recover? Will political conditions stabilize? Will future years be safer? These questions shape decisions. Migration often begins long before conditions become unbearable. People leave because they anticipate worsening circumstances, not merely because they react to disaster. This possibility aligns with several observations from the site. The city does not appear suddenly destroyed. It appears gradually emptied. The distinction matters. Annihilation traps people. Migration releases them. The inhabitants seem to have chosen movement over persistence, at least in significant numbers. Disease may have played a role in that choice, or it may not have. The available evidence cannot settle the debate conclusively. What it does reveal is a city confronting uncertainty from multiple directions at once. Environmental pressures, political instability, economic change, possible health challenges, population movement. Each factor alone is manageable. Together they become harder to resist. As archaeologists continue searching for answers, attention increasingly turns toward another challenge. Not a specific cause, but a problem of interpretation itself. Because the deeper researchers investigate, the more they discover that the evidence can support several competing explanations at the same time. And that is where the mystery becomes most difficult. Not in finding theories, but in deciding which theories deserve belief. The deeper researchers investigate the abandoned city, the more complicated the mystery becomes. At first glance, the problem appears straightforward. A thriving urban centre exists for generations, perhaps centuries. Then it is deserted. The obvious task is to identify the cause. Yet archaeology rarely rewards simple conclusions. Each new discovery seems to answer one question while creating two more. Evidence that supports a particular explanation often reveals details that complicate it. Environmental records suggest stress but not necessarily collapse. Signs of political instability appear plausible but difficult to prove. Migration explains the disappearance of people, yet not the precise reason they chose to leave. The result is a landscape of competing theories. Some are supported by substantial evidence. Others remain speculative. A few have captured public imagination despite limited archaeological support. The challenge for scholars is distinguishing what is known from what is merely possible. One popular tendency in discussions of abandoned cities is the search for a single dramatic event. Human beings are naturally attracted to stories with clear turning points: a great drought, a devastating invasion, a catastrophic epidemic, a sudden natural disaster. Such explanations are satisfying because they simplify complexity. Unfortunately, history is rarely so cooperative. Many researchers now believe that urban abandonment often emerges from a combination of pressures rather than a single cause. This perspective can feel less dramatic, but it aligns more closely with how human societies actually function. Cities are complex systems. Complex systems usually fail through interaction rather than isolation. Consider a city experiencing moderate environmental stress. On its own, the challenge may be manageable. Now add economic disruption. Adaptation becomes harder. Add political instability. Decision-making becomes less effective. Add population movement. Urban systems lose resilience. None of these factors individually guarantees abandonment. Together they create conditions under which abandonment becomes increasingly likely. The abandoned city may represent exactly this kind of convergence. Yet even this interpretation remains open to debate. Some scholars argue that environmental evidence deserves greater emphasis. Climate reconstructions in certain regions reveal periods of prolonged drought coinciding with urban decline. Water availability decreases. Agricultural productivity suffers. Migration increases. From this perspective, environmental change acts as the primary driver, with political and economic consequences following naturally. Others remain cautious. Human societies have survived severe droughts before. Environmental challenges alone do not automatically lead to abandonment. Communities adapt in diverse ways. Technological innovations emerge. Trade networks compensate for local shortages. The evidence remains incomplete. Political explanations generate similar debates. Perhaps shifting regional power structures undermined the city's position. Trade routes moved elsewhere. Administrative systems weakened. Security deteriorated. Residents responded by relocating to more favorable locations. This theory explains certain patterns. It struggles with others. Why would such a large urban center fail to recover? Why do signs of rapid abandonment remain visible? Questions persist. Conflict-based explanations face their own difficulties. Archaeologists expect particular forms of evidence when warfare destroys a city. Burn layers, structural damage, concentrations of weapons, human remains associated with violence. Some evidence exists, not enough to support a straightforward conquest narrative. The city appears stressed rather than annihilated. Disease remains equally controversial. The absence of definitive proof prevents strong conclusions. Epidemics may have contributed to broader instability, but available evidence does not allow researchers to identify them as the sole cause. Again, complexity dominates. No single explanation fully accounts for everything observed. This uncertainty has occasionally created space for more speculative theories. Throughout history, abandoned cities have attracted legends. Local traditions preserve stories of curses, divine punishment, supernatural events, and mysterious disappearances. Such narratives often emerge because human beings dislike unanswered questions. An empty city invites imagination. A silent street encourages storytelling. Ruins create opportunities for myth. In many parts of the world, abandoned settlements acquire reputations that extend far beyond historical evidence. Travelers tell stories. Communities pass down legends. Over generations, memory and imagination become intertwined. Researchers approach such traditions with care. Legends sometimes preserve fragments of genuine historical experience. A story about a cursed city may contain distant echoes of environmental disaster, political upheaval, or social trauma. Yet legends are not evidence. The archaeological record remains the primary source of information, and that record consistently points toward human decisions shaped by real-world pressures. Perhaps the most important lesson emerging from decades of study is that abandonment should not automatically be viewed as failure. Modern observers often interpret empty cities through the lens of collapse. Yet from the perspective of the people involved, leaving may have represented a successful adaptation. A community facing declining conditions relocates. Its population survives. Its traditions continue elsewhere. Its descendants build new lives. The city is abandoned, but the society endures. This distinction changes the story significantly. The ruins suggest loss. Human history suggests continuity. The city disappears from the landscape of daily life, yet the people remain active participants in regional history. Their descendants may live in neighboring settlements. Their cultural practices may influence future communities. Their knowledge may travel with them. What vanishes is not necessarily the population. It is the urban center itself. This perspective helps explain why the mystery remains so compelling. Researchers are not investigating a simple disaster. They are investigating a transformation. A prosperous city ceases to function. Its inhabitants reorganize their lives. The reasons involve multiple interacting forces. The evidence preserves fragments of each, yet certainty remains elusive. Scholars still debate important details because the surviving record contains gaps that may never be filled. Documents are missing. Voices are absent. Decisions made by ordinary people were rarely recorded. The city tells much of its story, not all of it, and perhaps that incompleteness is unavoidable. Ancient history often resembles a partially preserved manuscript. Entire sections survive. Others are damaged. Some are missing entirely. Researchers reconstruct what they can, compare interpretations, and acknowledge uncertainty where necessary. The abandoned city is one of those manuscripts. Remarkably informative, frustratingly incomplete. Its empty buildings preserve countless clues. Its silence preserves countless questions. Yet one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Whatever happened here did not end with the city's abandonment. The consequences extended far beyond its walls. Because when a major urban centre disappears, neighbouring regions feel the effects. Trade changes. Population shifts. Power moves elsewhere. The story continues, even after the city itself falls silent. When a city is abandoned, the event does not remain confined to the city itself. Urban centres are connected to the wider world through countless visible and invisible relationships. Roads link them to neighbouring settlements. Trade routes tie them to distant regions. Political systems depend upon them. Religious traditions radiate outward from them. Agricultural communities supply them. Merchants travel through them. Information flows across them. A city may appear self-contained when viewed from within its walls. In reality, it functions as part of a much larger network. When that network loses one of its most important nodes, consequences spread outward. The abandoned city leaves behind more than empty buildings. It leaves behind a vacuum. The effects are not always immediate. Sometimes they unfold gradually over years or decades. Yet archaeological evidence from many regions suggests that the disappearance of a major urban centre often triggers broader transformations in settlement patterns, economic activity and political organisation. People begin moving. Some relocate to nearby towns. Others establish new communities. Still others merge with existing populations. The result is rarely a simple transfer. Instead, population disperses across the landscape. From the perspective of the abandoned city, this movement appears as decline. From the perspective of surrounding settlements, it may appear as opportunity. A smaller community receiving new residents gains labour knowledge and economic activity. Agricultural production may increase. Trade connections may expand. New construction may occur. Social networks become larger and more complex. The disappearance of one centre can contribute to the growth of another. Archaeologists studying regional settlement patterns often observe exactly this process. Large cities decline while smaller settlements expand. Population does not vanish. It redistributes. This observation helps explain why some ancient landscapes remain inhabited even after major urban centres disappear. The people adapt. Communities reorganize. Human life continues. Yet the transformation is rarely seamless. The abandoned city once performed important functions. It coordinated trade, managed resources, hosted religious ceremonies, provided administrative services, supported specialized labor. When those functions disappear, replacements must emerge elsewhere. This process takes time. During the transition, economic and political systems may become less efficient. Trade routes shift. Old relationships weaken. New ones develop. The region enters a period of adjustment. One fascinating detail observed at several archaeological sites is that material culture often travels with migrating populations. Pottery styles appear in new locations. Construction techniques spread. Religious practices continue. Certain forms of craftsmanship re-emerge elsewhere. These traces allow researchers to follow the movement of ideas even when individual people remain impossible to identify. The abandoned city may have ceased functioning, but aspects of its culture survive. Its influence extends beyond its physical lifespan. This continuity challenges the popular image of complete disappearance. Civilizations rarely vanish in the way stories often suggest. They transform. Elements are lost. Elements survive. The descendants of former residents continue shaping history in places far removed from the original city. What disappears is concentration. The city once gathered people together. Now those people are distributed across the landscape. The archaeological record captures this process imperfectly. Some migrations leave clear traces. Others remain difficult to detect. The evidence remains incomplete. Even so, patterns emerge. Regional populations adapt to changing conditions. New centers of activity appear. Old centers fade. The city becomes one chapter within a larger story of human movement and resilience. Trade networks provide another important clue. A major urban center rarely exists in isolation. Merchants connect distant communities through systems of exchange that may extend hundreds of miles. Goods, resources, information, and cultural influences move along these routes. When the city is abandoned, those routes do not necessarily disappear. They change. Some become less active. Others are redirected. Alternative centers emerge. Researchers studying trade patterns sometimes observe shifts occurring around the same period as urban decline. Certain goods become less common. Exchange networks reorganize. New economic hubs gain prominence. Such changes reveal how interconnected ancient societies truly were. The abandonment of a city affects people far beyond its immediate boundaries. A merchant living in a neighboring region may lose customers. A farming community may lose access to important markets. Political leaders may face new challenges. Religious institutions may adapt to changing populations. The consequences ripple outward. One lesser-known aspect of urban abandonment is that memory itself becomes part of the process. Former residents and their descendants often remember places long after they leave them. Stories persist. Traditions survive. Landmarks retain symbolic significance. Even when physical occupation ends, cultural connections may remain. Some abandoned cities continue appearing in regional traditions centuries later. Their ruins become landmarks. Their histories become part of local identity. Their disappearance acquires meaning beyond simple historical events. Memory preserves what occupation no longer does. This preservation is rarely perfect. Stories change over time, details fade, legends emerge. Historical reality becomes mixed with imagination. Yet the persistence of memory reveals something important. The city mattered. People did not simply walk away from an insignificant settlement. They left behind a place that had shaped lives for generations. The emotional dimension of abandonment is difficult for archaeology to capture. Excavations reveal structures and artifacts. They reveal economic systems and environmental conditions. They do not directly reveal grief, or nostalgia, or uncertainty. Yet such emotions almost certainly accompanied the departure. Imagine families leaving neighborhoods where ancestors had lived for decades or centuries. Imagine sacred places being left behind. Imagine familiar streets visited for the final time. These experiences leave few archaeological traces. Their absence from the record does not diminish their significance. The city disappears physically. Its influence continues socially and culturally. As researchers examine the aftermath of abandonment, another question becomes increasingly important. If the city occupied such a valuable location, why did later generations not fully reclaim it? The land remains. The buildings remain. The advantages that once supported prosperity may still exist. Yet the city never truly returns to life. Its silence endures, and that enduring silence may contain one of the most revealing clues of all. The city is abandoned. Years pass, then decades, then centuries, and still it does not return. For archaeologists, this may be one of the most revealing aspects of the entire mystery. A city can be destroyed and rebuilt. History offers countless examples. Fires consume neighborhoods only for reconstruction to begin almost immediately. Wars devastate urban centers, yet survivors return and rebuild. Earthquakes level structures, but communities often remain attached to the location. The abandoned city follows a different path. Its population leaves, its streets fall silent, and despite the passage of generations, large-scale reoccupation never fully occurs. The question is unavoidable. Why? The location once supported a thriving urban center. It possessed access to resources, trade connections, and the infrastructure necessary for substantial population growth. If these advantages were sufficient in the past, Why did they not attract future settlers in the same way? The answer may lie in the difference between a place and a system. A city is more than geography. It is also a network of relationships, institutions, economic connections, and shared expectations. When these elements disappear, rebuilding becomes far more difficult than simply occupying the same land. Imagine arriving at the abandoned city generations after its decline. Walls may still stand. Roads remain visible. Public buildings survive in various states of preservation. At first glance, the site appears usable. Yet beneath that appearance, essential systems have vanished. Trade routes have shifted elsewhere. Political centres have moved. Population concentrations have changed. Economic opportunities now exist in different locations. The landscape remains. The world around it does not. One of the most important lessons of urban history is that cities thrive because they occupy strategic positions within larger networks. When those networks change, former advantages can lose significance. A river may alter its course. A regional power centre may emerge elsewhere. Trade routes may bypass the location. Environmental conditions may become less favourable. The city's original strengths may no longer exist in the same form. Researchers studying abandoned settlements often observe this pattern. The site itself remains physically impressive. The circumstances that once made it prosperous do not. This helps explain why some ancient cities remain empty despite appearing suitable for occupation. The challenge is not rebuilding structures. The challenge is recreating the conditions that supported them. Sometimes those conditions are gone forever. Environmental evidence provides another possible explanation. If declining water availability contributed to abandonment, future populations may have encountered the same limitations. A city requiring extensive resource management becomes less attractive when alternative locations offer more dependable conditions. Even modest environmental disadvantages can influence settlement decisions over long periods. People do not necessarily return simply because a place once succeeded. They choose locations that appear most promising in the present. The abandoned city may no longer meet that standard. Memory may also play an unexpected role. Throughout history, certain locations acquire reputations that influence future behavior. Ruins inspire stories. Stories shape perceptions. Perceptions affect decisions. A city associated with decline, hardship, or failure may become less attractive to potential settlers. This does not require supernatural beliefs or dramatic legends. Human beings naturally pay attention to historical experience. If generations remember that a location was abandoned under difficult circumstances, they may hesitate to invest heavily in returning. The archaeological record occasionally suggests precisely this possibility. Small-scale occupation may occur. Travelers visit. Temporary use continues. Yet large urban redevelopment never materializes. The city remains more valuable as a memory than as a destination. One particularly fascinating aspect of abandoned cities is how quickly nature begins reclaiming them. Without continuous maintenance, urban environments change rapidly. Road surfaces deteriorate, buildings weaken, vegetation spreads, water systems fail, structures collapse. Each year increases the effort required for restoration. After enough time passes, rebuilding may become more difficult than establishing a new settlement elsewhere. The city gradually transforms from infrastructure into ruins. This transformation changes how future generations perceive the site. A functioning city invites habitation. A ruin invites reflection. People no longer see opportunities. They see history. The abandoned city enters a new phase of existence. Its role shifts from supporting life to preserving memory. The silence deepens. The streets no longer serve commerce. The buildings no longer shelter families. The public spaces no longer host ceremonies. Yet the city remains present. Its physical survival becomes part of the mystery. Many ancient settlements vanish completely through later construction, agriculture erosion, or reuse of materials. The abandoned city persists long enough for future generations to encounter it. Its emptiness becomes visible. Its questions remain unanswered. Researchers continue investigating because the lack of reoccupation appears significant. If the city had simply suffered a temporary setback, large-scale return might be expected. The fact that such a return never occurs suggests that abandonment solved a problem rather than merely postponing one. The inhabitants leave. Their descendants do not come back. That pattern deserves attention. Perhaps environmental conditions remain unfavourable. Perhaps economic geography changes permanently. Perhaps political realities evolve beyond recognition. Most likely several factors interact. As with the abandonment itself, no single explanation fully accounts for what happened. The evidence points toward complexity. The city does not die because of one event. It remains abandoned because multiple conditions continue discouraging recovery. This conclusion may seem less dramatic than tales of sudden catastrophe, yet it reveals something profound about human history. Civilizations are adaptive, people move, communities reorganize, opportunities shift. What once appeared indispensable can become unnecessary. The city survives physically, its purpose does not, and so the ruins remain where they have stood for centuries, watching generations pass around them. Their empty streets preserve the final stage of a long transformation. A thriving urban centre becomes an archaeological site. A place built for the future becomes evidence of the past. Yet even after all the investigations, excavations and debates, one final question remains. What can the abandoned city teach us about ourselves? Because its story is not only about ancient people, it is also about the fragile balance upon which every civilization depends. The abandoned city begins as a mystery. It ends as a mirror. For generations, archaeologists, historians, environmental scientists and explorers have searched its streets for answers. They have measured walls, analyzed soil samples, studied artifacts, reconstructed climate records, and compared competing theories. Each discovery has illuminated another part of the story. Yet the deeper the investigation goes, the clearer one reality becomes. The city is not remarkable because it was abandoned. Human history is full of abandoned places. It is remarkable because of what its abandonment reveals. At its height, the city appears permanent. Its residents build homes intended to last. Public structures are constructed with enormous effort. Trade networks connect distant regions. Religious institutions reinforce social stability. Economic systems support growing populations. Everything about the urban landscape communicates confidence. The people living there likely believe they are part of something enduring. That belief is understandable. Civilizations often feel strongest shortly before their vulnerabilities become visible. From within the system, continuity appears natural. Markets open every morning. Water arrives through familiar channels. Food reaches households. Political institutions function. The city survives one year after another. Normality becomes an expectation. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that permanence is often an illusion. Not because cities are weak, because they are complex. Complex systems depend upon countless relationships remaining functional at the same time. Water supplies, agricultural production, trade routes, political coordination, social cooperation, environmental stability, economic confidence. When these elements work together, cities flourish. When enough begin failing simultaneously, even successful urban centers become vulnerable. The abandoned city illustrates this principle with unusual clarity. No single explanation fully accounts for its fate. Environmental pressures appear important. Political instability may have contributed. Economic shifts likely played a role. Population movement accelerated change. Disease remains a possibility. Each factor explains part of the evidence. None explains everything. For modern researchers, this complexity is not a disappointment. It is the lesson. History rarely unfolds according to simple narratives. The desire to identify one decisive cause is understandable, but human societies do not operate that way. Cities are living systems shaped by interactions among people. environments, economies, and institutions. Their successes emerge from those interactions. Their failures emerge from them as well. The abandoned city demonstrates how gradual pressures can produce outcomes that appear sudden when viewed from a distance. Centuries of growth are followed by a relatively brief period of transformation. To later generations, the city seems to vanish. To the people living through events, the process may have felt very different. One decision at a time, one difficult season at a time, one family relocating, one trade route weakening, one harvest disappointing expectations, one adaptation following another. The final result becomes visible only after enough changes accumulate. This perspective transforms abandonment from an isolated event into a human story. The city is not simply deserted. People make choices. Communities respond to circumstances. Families pursue survival. Migration becomes adaptation. From the standpoint of those involved, leaving may not have represented failure at all. It may have represented resilience. This idea challenges popular images of collapse. The ruins suggest disappearance. The evidence suggests continuity. The urban centre dies. The population survives. Knowledge travels. Traditions endure. Descendants build new lives elsewhere. History continues. Perhaps this is why abandoned cities remain so fascinating. They exist at the intersection of presence and absence. Walls remain standing. People are gone. Evidence survives. Explanations remain incomplete. The landscape preserves enough information to provoke curiosity, but not enough to eliminate uncertainty. The mystery endures. Even today, scholars continue debating details that may never be resolved conclusively. New technologies reveal previously invisible evidence. Excavations uncover additional clues. Environmental records improve. Interpretations evolve. Yet some questions may remain unanswered forever. The city keeps part of its story, and perhaps that is appropriate. Every historical reconstruction encounters limits. Ancient people rarely leave complete explanations behind. Most lived ordinary lives that passed unrecorded. Their concerns, hopes, fears, and decisions survive only indirectly through material traces. Archaeology excels at recovering fragments. The whole remains beyond reach. Still, those fragments are enough to reveal something profound. The abandoned city was not inevitable. Its rise required cooperation, innovation, labor, and vision. Its survival required generations of effort. Its disappearance required change. Nothing about the process was simple. Nothing about it was predetermined. The city emerged because people created it. The city vanished because people responded to circumstances that creation alone could not control. That balance remains familiar today. Modern societies often imagine themselves separated from the experiences of ancient communities. Technology has transformed transportation, communication, agriculture, medicine, and governance. The world appears fundamentally different. In many ways it is, yet certain realities remain unchanged. Cities still depend on resources. Economies still depend on stability. Communities still adapt to environmental pressures. Migration still follows opportunity. Human beings still make decisions under conditions of uncertainty. The abandoned city feels distant until these parallels become visible. Then the ruins seem surprisingly familiar. Their empty streets remind us that permanence is never guaranteed. Their surviving walls remind us that human achievements can endure long after their creators disappear. Their unanswered questions remind us how much of history remains hidden. And their existence reminds us that civilizations are not monuments. They are processes, living systems sustained by countless acts of cooperation. For a time, the city succeeded brilliantly. Then conditions changed. People adapted. The city fell silent. Its story became part of the landscape. And centuries later, among weathered stones and abandoned streets, that story still waits for anyone willing to listen. The sun continues crossing the sky above the ruins, just as it did when the city was alive. Wind moves through broken doorways. Rain falls upon stones shaped by hands long vanished. Seasons pass across streets that once carried merchants, farmers, children, officials, and travellers. The city remains where it has always been, yet everything that gave it meaning has changed. Time has a way of softening even the greatest human achievements. Walls crumble, roofs disappear, names are forgotten, empires fade into fragments of memory. What once seemed permanent becomes part of the landscape. Future generations walk among remnants without fully knowing the lives that unfolded there, and yet something survives. Not only buildings or artifacts, but evidence of human persistence. The city existed because people believed in the future. They planted crops they might never harvest, built structures intended for descendants they would never meet, maintained roads, reservoirs, workshops, and homes because they expected life to continue. For centuries it did. Then circumstances shifted. The inhabitants adapted in the only way available to them. Some left. Others followed. The city gradually surrendered its role as a centre of life and became a witness to history instead. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with traces. A worn threshold shaped by countless footsteps. A courtyard where families once gathered. A workshop abandoned in the middle of an ordinary world that no longer existed. These fragments remain because the past never disappears completely. It settles into the earth, waiting patiently beneath dust, vegetation, and time. Perhaps that is why abandoned cities continue to capture human imagination. They remind us that every civilization, no matter how confident, exists within a larger story, shaped by nature, chance adaptation, and change. They reveal both the fragility and resilience of human societies. The city no longer serves the living. Its markets are gone. Its voices are gone. Its daily routines have vanished into history. Yet its presence endures. Across centuries of silence, it continues offering a quiet lesson about memory, survival, and the passage of time. And as evening settles over the ruins, shadows lengthen across the empty streets where life once flourished. The stones remain. The mystery remains. The landscape remembers.